Hey everyone, today's drop features Emre, founder of Rosetta, the programmable yield layer for Hyperliquid. Welcome Emre, it's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. I believe you guys are also chatting with John at Portals about integrating the Portals apps, right?
Yeah, very excited about plugging Portals into Rosetta because I think you guys are doing a great job making, sophisticated, DeFi flows very simple and very clean. So really excited about the integration.
Cool. Yeah, John's very excited as well. Look, we'll get onto Rosetta just now, but I did just want to start by chatting about Parabol, which was
Mhm.
your first major DeFi venture.
Yeah.
Parabol focused on creating a digital dollar fully backed by US treasuries and repo markets. What was the original vision for Parabol, and how did it shape your understanding of sustainable yield in DeFi?
Yeah, so with Parabol we try to build the cleanest possible digital dollar. So fully backed, transparently reported and fully maturity matched. So we actually started after the USDCD pack and then decided to build a product where, stablecoin where all the yield is generated on a fully mature to match manner. So users earned, yield from short dated T-bills that were aligned with the liquidity profile of the liabilities. So we wanted to remove the duration risk from the system. So that taught us a lot about yields, obviously, which is now turning into a marketing word and not a concept. But in we worked a lot on the TradFi side of things. So we have in TradFi you have things like duration risk, curve risk, counterparty risk, etc. And then in DeFi we're hand waving all that behind the single APY number. So with Parabol, I think we obsessed over what's actually generating the yield, what risk free means, and what's not, and how do you make that legible to like normal people. So we worked on that for a while, and then we decided to move on beginning of this summer. And Rosetta is basically taking that lesson and moving into a fully on-chain and block level. So if you say you earned 5%, we can actually pinpoint you to the every micro event that creates that 5%.
That's cool. So this whole experience, right, taught you about designing stable and scalable yield systems, but also what limitations did you see actually that inspired the formation of Rosetta?
Yeah, so with Parabol and ParaUSD, the users deposited. I mean, not deposit, but they were landing their tokens into a smart contract by choosing a period of their choice, and then that period actually were matching the underlying T-bills, and in the background there were actual assets generating real yield. So that was really powerful, but I think it had two hard limitations. First off, you were still anchored to an off-chain, infrastructure like banks, brokers, settlement cycles, legal wrappers, loans locked into a duration, so users couldn't really move their capital in and out, and that basically slows everything down and makes it really hard to be truly composable with DeFi. And I think the second part was the real one, the real reason. So because the actual yield surface was quite narrow, so you're basically optimizing within a very fixed RWA box. So with Rosetta, the response is it's the response to those constraints. So instead of depending on a single pool of off-chain yields, we index, basically the entirety of the yield surface, like all the on-chain yield opportunities on Hyperliquid. So these are, things like, lending, vaults, funding rates, and really treat them as a, dynamic block by block landscape. So Parabol was, you take this yield and pipe this yield into crypto, and Rosetta is basically turning that entire chain into a like a programmable yield surface. So that's why we moved on from one yield product into all yield products, and then let the users choose where they want to get their yield from.
Nice. So that's where your block level yield infrastructure framework comes from. And is this why you believe yield needs to be measured and executed at block level rather than periodic updates? Like, can you expand a bit on what you've just said as to the more intricate or granular reasons behind it?
Yeah, it's a technical, it's not really easy to understand when you see it, when you hear it for the first time. But we decided to say, okay, in TradFi you have, like overnight repo, and you can basically earn yield on an overnight basis. Within crypto, in crypto you have blockchain, which is basically you have these blocks, and within those blocks, every time the chain produces a new block, um, you can actually earn yield, especially with things like Morpho, where the vault mints new shares, so you can get this yield on a block level. So at Rosetta we do like high level, we do three things every block. So we index all these yield surface. So we actually read the chain and see what's happening in all the yield ranges we support. So I mean, I won't mention the same, like let's go with landing, for example, landing rates, supply rates. Then there's a router which decides, given a user's, or, an integrator's policy, where they want to earn yield from. So where their, capital should be sitting. This could be like on a block level, but it would be like super, costly. So within a certain number of blocks, let's say. And then the third level is the execution layer, where we actually move or rebalance the position so that the reality of where they're earning the yield is matching their policy. So we basically, that's why we call it block level, because it means that the chain is the source of truth, and that gives you much tighter risk control and less drift between the intended and the actual allocation. And it's I think the most important part is that it's really granular, but it's also at the same time auditable and backtestable. So you can actually look back and then see what you could have done instead of just leaving your capital there.
Thank you. That's a really clear description and breakdown. I will actually share with the audience, when we share this, your content, your articles that you've written, because you do write about everyone talking about on-chain yield, but almost no one understands how it's actually generated block by block. So that was super clear. Thank you very much. And of course, people have huge misconceptions about how yield truly works on chain and what makes Rosetta that transparent. Thanks for going into that. So Rosetta is built natively on Hyperliquid, which itself is pioneering a new on-chain performance standard. Why did you choose to build on Hyperliquid, and how does it combine with Hypercore and HyperEVM's enable features that weren't possible elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, really good question. So I think Hyperliquid gives us something that most other, chains don't. So it's simply like when people ask me, I say, okay, imagine building on top of Binance or, and using an EVM on the side. So it's more like a unified environment where, the core, which is the engine that's powering the exchange, and the smart contract layer, which is like HyperEVM, they're actually designed to talk to each other with very low friction. And for us, that means, a few things that wasn't possible before. So we can read like funding and market data from Hypercore every block with a very low latency. We can, so we have a policy layer that we use. So we can express, complex policies and execution logic at the EVM layer or also on the core layer. And we can really do it in an environment that's optimized for very serious traders. So, slippage or liquidity and UX are not really afterthought. So these two components, the Hypercore side and HyperEVM, which is called Hyperliquid, lets us build, I think what we call it internally is an invisible yield rail. So your capital can sit in an, EVM vault on like Morpho, for instance, but it's also, being informed by, core level signals or instruments. Now they're bringing landing into Hypercore as well. And on most like other stacks, that really wasn't possible, or it was really clunky if you were to bridge between, take your money from an exchange and then put it into an EVM chain. That would be extremely clunky. So I think it's like where it's real native for on Hyperliquid, and we are really like standing on the same foundation, the perps engine that they use. So we really want to leverage both side of things.
So in one of your research papers, all pieces, you mapped out 3 categories. You've touched on them now. So on-chain products, core native yield apps, EVM wrappers, and core EVM compositions. Can you explain how Rosetta fits into that last category, so core EVM compositions, and why you believe this composability will define the next generation of DeFi infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Hyperliquid, when like HyperEVM, when it started first coming out, obviously there were forks of the protocols that were launching on HyperEVM, which is like historically what always happened with new chains coming up. But I think that piece specifically was really explaining like what's possible and what new sort of products could be built using both the core side and the EVM composition. So with Rosetta, we're not really like wrapping core position as an ERC 20. We're actually reading signals from core, founding grades, open interests, bases, etc., and then turning them into EVM level actions. So these could be like in the future reallocations, could be hedges, or could be like vault state changes. You can actually see, we based on price changes how the landing markets change as well, which is like really interesting to monitor as well. And the value will, this is like further down the line, but the value comes from exactly from that feedback loop. I think the next generation of DeFi is going to be judged on 2 axes. I think how expressive it is. So things like what policies you can encode and how composable it is. So how easily like others can plug into. And we're trying to build it, as a yield primitive that other builders can embed so that they shouldn't really need to care about like where the yield is coming from, and then using these both exchange and the EVM side of things. So they can just really just define the constraints. They can define their own constraints and then plug them into a fully, as I mentioned, like fully verifiable rail, and then they can monitor where their capital is and then how they can actually get the yield or double check where the yield is coming from.
So you mentioned that your yield router will recalculate, reallocate every single block. Let's talk a bit about the optimization. You have an engine for this. How does your optimization engine decide where to deploy liquidity then on each block? What kind of risk management models ensure like performance without overexposure, I guess?
Yeah, so in the first version, we're only using Morpho, and it's not just, chasing the top APY, but it's optimizing under a set of policies that the user defines, the end user defines. So at a high level, every integrator has a policy stack, and then we give that policy layer to the user, and then they can choose where they want to allocate into. So we give them all the options. We're not really doing risk management per se, but the end user could then look into what's underlying. Obviously, like we're not really like adding all the random yield sources, but really giving that to the user. So on the risk side, it's down to the user's choice. So we're not like positioning ourselves as a risk provider or managing the risks, but we'll be plugging in some risk metrics into each vault as well. That's coming from a company that's really specialized on that. And then so the performance and the venues that users allocate into are declared by their own policies. Just to give you an example, they can just select vaults managed by Gauntlet, and then we would optimize between those vaults. Or they could just say, okay, use only Aave or Hypercore, BTC funding rates. So those will be the level of granularity that user gets. So we're really giving all the options and policies to the users so they can choose their own venues where they can really manage their own risk.
I love it. So you're making lending yield, let's say, more predictable, right? For the user and for the allocator. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It gives less risk, I would say, less hesitation as well as a user. So, look, you've emphasized the importance of verifiable transparency. Every yield event is recorded. Every reallocation is visible. What is the level of auditability, I guess? So critical for the next phase of DeFi, and how do you see it changing the relationship between users, protocols, liquidity providers, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, if you see one number, like maybe like see like 30% APY, you can say, it's a nice APY number, and then, a good UI is, good enough, and then you can just, ape into that protocol. But if you're a, serious allocator, if you're a fund or, like a stablecoin issuer or maybe a treasury company, or really like giving this as a yield option to your customers, then you really need to answer like much harder questions, just not the headline APY. So where was my capital at any given time? What risks was I exposed to when I moved it, and why? So, I mean, obviously, like there's been like major incident over the past couple of weeks. I think it was like 2-3 weeks ago with Stream Finance, and it's really like hard to like see what's underlying. So most like transparent DeFi is today is really like how well you use Etherscan, Doom, and maybe like Allium to get like the underlying data. And what we are doing internally, that's why we're spending a ton of time on our like data infrastructure, and is that our goal both humans and auditors can understand. And this, I think that level of auditability changes the relationship between users and protocols and RPs. So that's why actually we if you go to our website, you'll see the first thing you'll see will be rates that we show, which is basically if you go to like a lending protocol, you'll see these tail numbers. So that actually shows like how serious we are with the numbers, so they can actually prove that the yield is real. And I think with the next wave of capital coming in, they won't come in size without this kind of verifiable trail and auditability.
That's great. And looking ahead, let's say, well, not looking ahead. What I'd like to actually talk about a bit more is about your launch. What are your plans now? You're obviously at this point, you're in stealth, more or less, and I think you're coming out soon. Could you give us a bit more on the launch so users can get ready? Where do they need to follow you guys, and what do they need to watch?
Yeah, so we're testing it internally. So we had like quite a few architectural changes because of early feedback from users. So we really want to have a product where users can see what's going on, the allocations are executed properly, the policies are enforced, and the capital is, being as productive as it can be. So that's why we're taking a little bit slow on the launch side of things, but we're very close to, I think, onboarding our first users in the next couple of weeks. So I would say probably like early December we would have our first customers coming in. We're also talking with, lots of integrators that can actually embed this product into their own products. They can, visit our website, rosetta.sh, which has all the social links and or Telegram, and then they can start talking to us.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm not sure what happened, but I had a lag, so on two
Okay.
occasions. I just hope this actually gets through on the recording, but we'll check afterwards. So team-wise, you guys are pretty early stage, of course. Like, are you planning on big growth, or do you want to keep your team nice and small and focus on the important parts to begin with?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, again, so it's the same team that built Parabol, and it's the same company. So previously we had like a lot of like we basically took a long time to build a very shiny product. So with this one, with Rosetta, I think it's like being a second time founder. So we really want to keep this team really small, have the right people working on it. Currently we're 6. Still a, like a large team, I think. And we really want to have like full like accountability for each team member. So we're being very careful, who we hire and how we grow. But obviously, it's very like limiting from a team perspective. So our current goal is to, just grow our volumes and then grow the team essentially.
So how do you see the Parabol Rosetta relationship growing? Do you see them coexisting in the future? Could Parabol's institutional grade yield and Rosetta's real-time engine eventually connect to form a unified trustless yield layer of DeFi or something?
I mean, Parabol app is, I think, still very relevant. So Rosetta is basically under the hood, powering the yield. And I think in the long run, we could see an integration between the Parabol app and Rosetta that's more like retail friendly. So that would be probably the only, coexistence scenario. So they could maybe converge into, like a unified product where Parabol app users can use landing markets through Rosetta.
Gotcha. Okay. It's really exciting. I know John from our BD team at Portals.fi has been really pushing for me to get this set up. He's really excited about Rosetta. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We keep it short, we keep it very informative, and this has been fantastic.
Thanks for having
We
me.
always end with one question, which is the same question that everyone gets. There's only one bit that changes, which is the number. So I'm going to ask you this question.
Okay.
Today, the total TVL of DeFi, as per DeFi Llama, is $122 billion. It keeps going down every time I do a podcast in the last 2 weeks. But what's your prediction for this number at midnight on the 31st of December, 2025?
Okay, so I'll be checking that number like midnight. I think like I don't know the exact number, but like obviously we're building on DeFi, so want to be like directionally really bold and long on that number in the long run. I would say maybe $150 billion. But yeah,
In the next
something
5
around that.
weeks. You think we're
Something
going up?
around that.
Nice.
Hopefully, yeah.
I like that. Good. Optimistic. No one's
Yep.
gone down, actually. So,
Nice. That's great. That means you're talking to the right people.
going to the right people. Emre, thank you so much. And please keep us in the loop with all your movements, your announcements, and we'd love to share everything far and wide about Rosetta.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks for this. It was really fun.
Thank you.